In this next session, we're very honored to have Kristian Hemphill from a company here in Washington, D.C. called Grassroots Targeting. It is one of the premier firms in the United States that does voter research and voter targeting in political campaigns and also issue campaigns. AAKP is proudly nonpartisan and bipartisan in our relationships. But this is a very important session. In 2018, AAKP began the I Am a KidneyVoter campaign because for 50 years in the kidney community, patients, doctors, caregivers, researchers had not been united as a voting constituency. Believe it or not, for 50 years, this community had not organized itself. So it came to patient advocates. Richard Knight, Ed Hickey, others who have served on our board, had experience in many different campaigns across many different political viewpoints and parties. But what we were united in was this. We wanted to end medical paternalism at the table, where medical professionals make decisions about us without us. And we also wanted to end decisions made in Washington, D.C. for kidney patients that did not involve kidney patients. The 2024 campaign highlighted a very important fact in the United States. While some people look at the country as being divided, political specialists look at it as the rise of micro-constituencies. And that is precisely what we will hear from Kristian Hemphill from Grassroots Targeting. The kidney community is a micro-constituency with massive political clout. Ed Hickey talked about holding elected and appointed leaders accountable. Well, you can do that if you have a lot of money and you're a special interest. You can form a PAC and try to impact an election. But more importantly than a PAC is a vote. And this community has a massive amount of clout and votes. So Kristian Hemphill is one of the top targeting people in the United States. He works for Grassroots Targeting. You will see the chops that this firm has. But just as importantly, this firm is led by Blaze Hazelwood, a very good friend of the kidney community whose family has had generations of philanthropy and grassroots activism and patient advocacy in their own right for kidney care. So let me go ahead and turn this over to Kristian, who can go ahead and walk through the power of patient voice, choice, and our vote. Go ahead, Kristian.
Thank you. I hope everybody can hear me all right. My goal here today is to kind of walk through the importance of micro constituencies and how they can make a larger impact on the national scale, and then also how to build a micro constituency into something that's larger and to leverage that larger impact for better results. As Paul said, I work at a firm called Grassroots Targeting. I'm only going over this slide to talk about what we do for these campaigns. We've won lots of U.S. Senate races, Congress races, governor's races. We do it by refining who we're talking to down to a micro constituency, to get it down to the smallest group of people possible for these campaigns so that they can leverage that to win. So that's the goal. When you're starting with a micro constituency, you're already ahead of where a campaign is trying to get to. What makes us unique, this is real quick on myself a little bit. I started in politics by organizing a different micro-constituency of college students across the country that were upset, mostly with the debt, but also with lots of other policy issues that disadvantaged, at that time, millennials, not to age myself, but millennials when I was in college, and preferenced older populations. And we did it by building little networks on each campus that we could then build on when we came to Washington, D.C. to say, I've got networks on 5 campuses in your district and stuff like that. And that really builds the impact. So I'm not talking just for myself, I'm talking for the 5 networks on their 5 college campuses. Since then, I've moved into data and I do mostly voter research. What makes voters show up to the polls? What will make them switch from voting for one person to voting to another? And through that end, I have spent hours talking to voters in focus groups. I've spent thousands of hours poring over survey research and what makes them tick. And I'm going to try to weave that into my presentation today. But first, I want to talk about the balance of power. People think, this is general voters, general unregistered voters, think that one vote doesn't matter. You hear that all the time. What difference does one vote make? 150 million people voted in the presidential election. What difference does one vote make? These are 3 examples from 2024 of congressional districts that were won by the tightest margins. Iowa was won by just shy of 800 votes. Colorado 8 was about 2,500, and Pennsylvania 7 was just shy of 700 votes. The reason I picked these 3 districts, because combined there's about 4,000 votes. These 3 districts are who decided who the Speaker of the House was. So it's 4,000 votes across 3 districts determined the control of Congress. That number 4,000 just happened to, this is pure happenstance, align with the AAKP's number of voters that they were able to activate in the 2024 cycle per congressional district. They were active in about 10 states, and when you broke that out by congressional district, it became about 4,000 voters. So theoretically, AAKP can leverage 12,000 voters across these 3 congressional districts that would sway an election. Which way you want to sway an election doesn't matter to me. The point is that a small constituency can make a huge outsized difference when they're organized and ready and leveraged for impact. Here's another example that I have of this. This is the Senate race in Pennsylvania in 2024. The margin between McCormick and Casey was 15,000 votes. The stats on the side there were provided by AAKP. There are 10,000 transplant patients in the state of Pennsylvania. There are 5,000, well, almost 6,000 on the wait list for a transplant in Pennsylvania. The support ratio that I'm talking about, and I will be talking about in a couple other slides, is through past efforts, we've seen that each person can leverage about 4 other people to action. We can increase that number, but right now what we've seen is in the past we've been able to leverage about 4 people to further action. So that transplant support there, those patients on the transplant, that's their kind of support network. That's who else they can leverage. The full support ratio there is not just transplant patients, but also patients on dialysis and their full support ratio. You can see that even with the transplant patients and those waitlisted for transplant patients, those on the wait list for a transplant, that is the margin in this U.S. Senate race, just to continue to drive home that this community has enough votes when properly leveraged to make a difference. And you know who does know that they only won their race by 15,000 votes? Senator McCormick. And so if you come in there and you say, we've got 15,000 votes, that number is going to light off in his head because he knows that's what the difference was between him being in that office and him, doing whatever else he did with his time. So that's kind of the importance of these small numbers, but you've got to know them and you've got to show that you can leverage them to action. Voter action, being able to inform elected officials about the amount of kidney voters or members of the kidney community that are in their district is really important. There are 37 million folks that are impacted in the U.S. By kidney issues, or their family members or a loved one is impacted by that. And that 37 million folks, let me tell you, they have lots of different policy priorities. They might care, they probably have policy priorities that are at odds. After looking at hundreds or thousands of surveys, the things that always rank top for every voter basically are matters of healthcare and pocketbook. What we're talking about when we're talking about patient voice and patient choice, that is healthcare and pocketbook. So you can really unite a whole community amongst those issues, but you've got to be organized to do that. So setting goals, such as AAKP did in 2024 for 500,000 registered voters, that's really important. Another common misconception is isn't everybody registered to vote? Doesn't everybody participate in the election? That's not true. About 80% of the voting age population is registered to vote, so there's another 20% that isn't even registered, and then of that 80% that is registered to vote, only 80% of them vote, so that's another 20% of folks that don't vote. So we're talking about 100 million voting age population adults that don't vote. some of that is going to be in the kidney community as well. So being able to register those people and leverage them to action is going to be really important. I'm going to say this a couple of times, but having a way to demonstrate your impact right now, nowadays, that's going to be mostly through social media. Like, we've got on the screen here a KidneyVoter holding their sign that I'm a KidneyVoter. That stuff matters because say you don't meet with that congressperson, or you don't meet with that senator, or you don't meet with that, whatever political policy decision maker you're trying to get in front of, but you meet with a member of their staff, first thing they're going to do is hop on social media and see if they can see any of the movement that you're talking about that you have in their district. So having social media posts that say I'm a KidneyVoter, stuff like that, is a very clear source that's visible to everyone that this community is organized and is voting on the priorities of this community, not on other issues. A couple more stats here. This graph here, the KidneyVoter Select States Network Impact, this is the AAKP's network here. My legend fell off a little bit. So that tealish, that grayish teal blue there is patients on dialysis, and the larger blue bar is their support ratio network. Just one other quick example of how impactful this network can be. If you're looking at that dialysis support network bar in Florida, that's about 200,000, say the Kidney Network gets really involved in Florida and they really organize. Getting to that 200,000 number is probably unrealistic. As a person that's done a lot of grassroots organizations, you're never going to get 100% participation. But say we get 10%. 10% sounds really doable, right? That's about 20,000 people in that dialysis patient support ratio network. 20,000, that's the margin that Rick Scott won his Senate race in 2018. Again, if you walked into Rick Scott's office and you said, we got 20,000 voters, it's going to write a bell in his mind because he knows that number. He knows that's the difference between him and Senator Bill Nelson being there. So my point is knowing those facts, having this network is important. The other side has special interests. Special interests can offer elected officials and political policymakers money in the form of PACs or money in the form of direct contributions. Guess what they're going to do with that PAC? They're going to try to spend a lot of money to get to votes. You are starting with votes. So all of their money is trying to get to where you already are. That's a huge difference from what you're walking in with and what they're walking in with. Too many times, grassroots organizations don't walk in with the numbers of their support. They don't walk in with that, we've got 20,000 folks. The special interest walks in with, we've got a $20,000 check. That's kind of the difference. But if you walk in with that 20,000 network of voters, that's going to make a big difference. This is kind of the, how do we build the coalition? There's kind of three parts here, starting with individual patients and members of the kidney community leveraging their personal network to action. And then there's how do we find partner organizations to leverage to action on specific things, and then how do we broaden out to the general electorate. So this first section here on coalition building, first thing I want to point out is when a neighbor reaches out to a neighbor and asks them to vote or asks them to vote a certain way, that individual is 6% more likely to do that compared to any other form of voter contact. Campaigns, PACs, they're always trying to figure out how do I get a neighbor to ask their neighbor to do this thing, because that matters way more than some random person that I shipped in to ask them to do this thing. So starting off with leveraging our personal networks is a great place to be. When you're building this coalition and you're reaching out to your personal network for support, you want to make sure what you're doing is you're asking them for meaningful calls to action, specific calls to action too. Everybody's going to say yes to, will you support me, or will you be supportive of KidneyVoter issues? They're going to say yes to that. But if you're specific, will you call this congressman and tell them that you care about this vote? That's a very specific call to action that provides them something meaningful to do. You're going to get better results from that. Providing an emotional connection to what you're trying to accomplish is really important. Building trust, is really important, and showing appreciation for support, as well as regularly communicating. I know that AAKP organized in 2023 and 2024 a response to the Biden administration and some of the CMS policies, and they got people to call in. If you leverage your personal network and you got 3 or 4 or 5 friends to call in, regularly communicating, hey, your call mattered, there were thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that called in on the same issue. It helps provide regular communication with folks that are doing you. It helps helping you. It shows appreciation for that support. It builds trust. It kind of does all of the things that we're trying to do when we're building a coalition. So we've leveraged our personal network to the max, but we still aren't making the impact that we want. What are potential ally organizations that we can work with on this particular issue, so it's not just 20,000 AAKP kidney voters, it's the 20,000 AAKP kidney voters plus the 10,000 Center for Patient Advocacy Leader activists that are in the so your organization is partnering with them to build a bigger impact for leverage there. Finally, who in the general electorate is supportive of the same issues as the kidney community is? I'm going to guarantee that a lot of them are. They just aren't educated about the issue, and they're not given a call to action about it. When I was asked to do this presentation, I was like, what is something we have done in the past at my firm to build an audience around patient choice? I found this example from Texas district that we did in 2023 for a client, and I'm not going to do much more than going into this example. In this congressional district, there were 352,000 voters that were animated by the idea of greater patient choice in their health care. Of that, 52% of them were female, 23% of them had a college education, 64% were older than the age of 45, 51% were married, 51% non-white. 75% of them had an income less than $100,000, and again, I did this in 2023, so only 46% of them had voted in the 22 general election. Having this larger impact audience to reach out to, or even when you're meeting with elected official or some other political decision maker, being able to say, in your district or in the area that you care about, I know, have their name, address, where they live, and how they vote. I know where 352,000 people are, and I'm going to educate them about your stance on this issue. That's a powerful thing that we've been able to see work time and time again with issue campaigns and lobbying campaigns. When you have that data, it's actionable, and that is what PACs and special interests are trying to get to a lot of the times, is how do we get the actionable data? You guys can build that actionable data at the grassroots level, as opposed to a PAC that's going to be something that's like grass tops level. You can use that data to leverage talking to them at their doors, phone, mail. You can do it through TV or digital ads, or you can do it by targeted social media. So there's really a wide variety of ways that you can use that data once you have it. Before I turn it over back to Paul for some questions, I just want to continue to say that small constituencies make a larger difference than larger votes. And I know that sounds kind of counterintuitive, but small constituencies are organized, and they know their issues, and they can leverage that for greater impact than people who aren't a member of those small constituencies. Campaigns are always trying to piece together a coalition that is built of lots of smaller constituencies. Great. Well, I think we were going to move to some questions, but I don't know how to turn it back to Paul from here.
Sure. Thank you very much, Kristian. I tell you what, let me ask you a fast question. For patients across the United States that are watching this, in the course of their daily activity, they may talk to a doctor, they may talk to family members, and they may talk to coworkers. The one thing that you've learned in 2024, the power of the individual, can you just restate it again for patients that are wondering when they watch the news, can they actually have an impact on issues like kidney care? What's the answer to them as a political professional?
Absolutely. Every vote counts. Organizing networks counts. There are countless examples every year of elections being decided by, I went through large examples that are like 100, but there are, goodness, the state house in Virginia has been decided by a coin toss before. Elections are tight, so individual voices do matter.
Thank you very much, Kristian. We really appreciate you taking time from your work at Grassroots Targeting. And again, we'd like to thank the founder of Grassroots Targeting, Blaze Hazelwood, and her family for their years of effort in the kidney community. We'll talk to you again, Kristian.